Video is going to be making a 2D city in processing, and I'm going to look up a 2D city as a reference, and we kind of want to make an animation based on this. And so this is the design I kind of liked and kind of drew my attention. And so this is how we're going to do it. So you can make a class, but we're going to make multiple classes. So we're going to make a class for the background, and we want to add stars. This photo doesn't have stars. We'll add a moon. And then we could add the background of the city, and then we want to add cars. So the way we're going to be portraying depth in this animation and kind of image we draw with processing is that we're going to be having different classes like stars, moon, city, outline, and cars. But what's first going to be drawn is the stars, and then it's going to be the moon, then it's going to be city outline, then it's going to be cars. So it's kind of, you're drawing the back first and then stuff closer to you, so it portrays the depth of that's closer. So now we're going to be opening up processing, and I'll just exit out of that. And once it's open, we'll make it bigger so you guys can see it, and we have an empty sketch. First off, I'm going to do what I usually do with every single thing is I'm going to include a void setup function. And void is just the syntax for writing functions. And void draw. And setup happens every single time. Setup happens only once. Draw happens multiple times throughout the program. So I wrote them. They're empty. They don't have anything in them. And let's cancel this really quick, and let's first draw something. So we're gonna make a size of pixels. We're making a canvas basically of 600 pixels wide and 600 pixels high. And then I'm gonna make a new tab. We're gonna call it. So now we're going to first do the background image, and we're just gonna make it black. Because it's supposed to be, we're going to make a night scene, and you can see it's a canvas 600 pixels wide, 600 pixels high, and black. Now we're going to make a new tab, and we're going to call it the name of our farthest away class that we're going to be making. In this case, it's going to be star. So it took me a second to kind of remember the structure for writing a class, but it's class star, curly bracket, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and then inside that you're gonna have a constructor. The constructor is the name of the class, semicolon, parentheses, open bracket, close bracket, and that is kind of initializing all the variables. And before you initialize variables, you need to declare them first. So we're going to make, for stars, every star needs an X and a Y, so it needs a position, and it also needs a size. And after we do that, we can now, so we just declared the variables. Now we can initialize them. So we're initializing X equals random, a random value between width. So this, you can have a bottom and top constraint, but width just means from 0 to whatever value. So that includes the whole entire canvas width and whole entire canvas height for Y. And then the size, we're just going to make it a random size between 1 and 5. And this is just pixels wide, so this is pretty small. We're going to make them kind of small shapes. And you first have to change float to size, because random only works with floating point values. And after we do that, we're going to make a function so it can display all the variables that we created. And inside the function, we're going to have a thing that says no stroke. Stroke is the outline of an image or shape, and we're not going to have an outline. The fill, just to see that it's drawing it, we're going to make it 255. and 255 is white, like pure white, so that's what we're making the stars. We're then going to draw an ellipse by x, y, size. So that's just the syntax for drawing an ellipse at that position and for that size. And we're just gonna take away some empty space. And now you run it, nothing happens. And the reason it doesn't happen is because you're not declaring any class, you're not initializing any class, and you're not displaying any function for the class. So what we have to do is do all that. And the simplest way, and the way that makes sense for most things, is I always just do an array of classes. So the type is star, which is class star. The name of it is stars equals new star, and then the amount of it. So in this case, we're just doing 10. We're just doing 10 stars to easily represent it. But you can always do more if you wish, less if you wish, just to test it out for now. And we're adding another for loop here for in I equals 0, I greater than stars dot length. So this is looking at the array that we just wrote, and it's determining the length of it, and just I plus plus. So this is a loop I use a lot, especially for arrays of classes, and even other stuff. I use this loop a lot. It's a really good for loop. And stars index I equals new star parentheses semicolon. And this is creating a new index, a new star for every index that there are in the array. And now to void draw, you could just write it again, but I want to save time, so what I do is just copy the for loop again, because it's the same thing, and all I'm doing is changing stars index dot display. So for every index of that star, it displays the function. So now when you run it, you have 10 stars. So if I count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There they are. There's all the stars. And now I'm going to make it 100, and you can see it makes 100 stars, which makes sense. Okay, now I'm going to save it, and after I save it, saving to my desktop. Let's see, what do I want to call it? 2D City, I'll call it. And I'll see you guys for the next class. Okay, so now we're going to make a new class. Made a new tab, so we can write the class in that tab, and we're calling it Moon, because that's the next closest class that we're making. In this image or animation, you could call it either. So we're defining classes Moon, curly bracket, and then we're going to do our constructor. It's just Moon. It's the same name as the class name. You always have to make it the same name as the class name. And now we're going to declare some variables. So the Moon, again, just like stars, needs a position, so x and y, and it needs a size. And now we're just going to be initializing them. So x equals random between width, and then we'll make y equals random between height. So this is just declaring the position, and the size, we'll make it a lot bigger than the stars, of course. So we'll make it a random between, say, 100 and 125. And now it's not going to do anything unless we write a function that actually uses those kind of variables. So we'll add a function called display, and inside of it we'll have no stroke again because we don't want the outline to show, and we'll fill it with pure white. And now we want ellipse, of course, again, because we want a circle. An ellipse is another, you can write a circle with an ellipse, and X, Y position, and then the size. And then we don't need this empty space, but I left it in. Nothing happens, of course. The reason it doesn't happen is because you're not showing it up here, you're not declaring it, you're not initializing it, you're not telling it there's any functions there. So what you need to do is make a new array. And you could just do it without making an array, but I always make an array because, you know, who knows? You can make another scene with lots of moons. You could change the moon to have different characteristics. So I always like to make arrays of stuff, especially objects, because you never know when you need different functionality, and you want to make an array allows you to make more functionality. So here we're just copying the code we wrote right above it, and we're changing it to moons.length, and we're changing stars to moons, and we're changing the name. We're changing the class type to moon because that's what we want to show up. And after we do that, we're also going to copy the code we wrote right above that. And for every instance, copy and paste is kind of having a ordeal here, but we get over that. And paste it, and you just have to change stars to moons. And now for every instance of moons.I, it displays the function display. So it calls the function display. And here you can see there's only one moon, and it's anywhere in the screen. And you see a pattern like here. Here's a good example of a pattern of a kind of a bad problem. And the problem is we're going to be writing city stuff over it, so we don't really need it that low, and we don't want it that low. So a canvas, as you know, draws stuff from top left corner is 0, and the bottom right corner is the highest point. So in this case, it would be 600, 600, the bottom right corner, and top left is 0, 0. So instead of y equals random, we'll just make it height divided by 2, so it goes from half the distance. So if we run this a lot of different times, you can see it never goes below half the screen, half the canvas size. And this is good, it works. Now we're just going to save it, and we'll talk about a different class. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about another class we're going to write, and this one's going to be the city outline, but we'll just call it city. Make it short, make it simple. And so we're writing the class city, of course, just like we do with the other ones. And after we make that, we make it a constructor in the middle. And we're writing it right now. And there's the constructor. And you might think, like, what needs to be in the city? So again, like most stuff, you need the city. The way we're going to be doing the outline of the city is we're just going to be drawing different rectangles at different positions, and they'll look like they mesh together into one outline. So what we're going to do is, for a rectangle, and to draw anything, you need a position. So we're declaring an X and a Y as floats. We're declaring a size 1 and a size 2, because rectangles, if you want to make a rectangle that isn't the same shape and isn't a square, you need 2 different sizes of things. So right now we're going to be initializing the variables. So for X, we're going to do a random between width, and for Y, we're going to be initializing a random height, I think we'll do. Yeah, we'll do height to start with. And now we're going to be initializing size, so we'll just make size 1 random between 20 and 50. So this is 20 and 50 pixels are the constraints, and it can be anywhere in between. And we're doing size 2. We're initializing them as a random value between 40 and 40 is a little high, so let's do 30 and 50. Now when you run it, well, first, okay, you can't run it first. First, you have to make a function. So we'll make a function display that can read the variables that we just made, and we'll add no stroke again because we don't want an outline, especially for this one, because then it doesn't look like they mesh together. So a fill, just to see that it's working, we'll make a red fill, so 25500, and we'll make it a rectangle instead of an ellipse, and we'll make it position X, Y, and then size 1, size 2. Size 1 reflects the width, and size 2 reflects the height of the rectangle. And now when you run it again, nothing happens because we didn't we didn't declare a class, we didn't initialize any class or instance of a class, and we didn't show any functionality. So above, we're going to be declaring a class. So we have city, we're actually declaring an array of classes. So we have city, bracket bracket cities. Cities is the name of an array, equals new city, and we're making 5 instances of this. And all we're going to be doing is changing the values before as we copy and paste the previous code. And instead of moons, we make it cities. Instead of moon, we make it city. And again, copy paste, kind of annoying, but we do the same thing. It saves a lot of time. And we change this from moons to cities. And cities, and we're good. So now we can run it, and you see it's making rectangles, but it does not look at all like a city. First off, the rectangles need to go down more and just even touch the ground. So a simple way of doing that, a simple way of calculating that is that, see here I'm just representing that size 1 is width and size 2 with height. So, and we kind of understand that, but there is a problem, and the problem is that, well, first off, let's just make them bigger. Let's just make the size 2 is the height of it, so let's just make it height. That way, there's no way it could possibly be greater than that, and that way it works. It goes all the way to the bottom. It works. And I try to be fancy, add some more functionality. You could, there is a way you can make it so it checks like what's the X position, and then from there it determines size 2, but I don't want to go through all that work. Let's just make the code simple. It's slightly inefficient. It could be a little more efficient, but we're just trying to make it quickly. So let's add more buildings. See, it looks more like an outline again, but we have some big gaps in between buildings, and the buildings are a little too narrow and kind of like really high and really oddly shaped. And let's make the size of the buildings a little bit wider, and see, it looks more like a city and more of an outline of the city. So let's not have 145 cities, but let's make it 20. And you can see it looks a lot better. You can see the height of the buildings is really tall, and it's kind of getting over the moon in the background. And a way to fix that would just be change where the random height of these cities, random Y position of these cities is being drawn. So instead of drawing from height, all the way from 0 to height, let's make it, because height is 600, right? How about we make it smaller than that? And the way we do it is 0. From 0 is still pretty high, so what we could do is 0 to height, do minus 300, but that's only going to be the top, from the very top to the middle. So what we could do is make it 100 300s, that way it's less, but you can see we need more differences in height, so let's make it a larger height. This is actually, I did it the wrong way, so we have to fix this, make it 400. There's more difference in height, but let's make this 15 so we can see the independent buildings a little bit better. And there we go, so the heights are changed a little bit better, and that's good. And you can fiddle with this a lot. We can see different how it's making random kind of city outlines every single time, but it's still kind of missing something. It's missing, like, the thing it's missing is that you can see the very side of it, to the top, bottom left, to the left. That way you have no difference in things. So it's looking a little bit better. But now there's a problem with, we need some smaller buildings, because every city, it's going to have some big buildings, but it's not only going to have big buildings. So a simple way of doing this would just be to copy this whole code and just make another layer of buildings. And we'll just call it x2, y2, size 3, size 4, and we have to declare all these variables again, all these new variables we just created. So we'll copy and paste the code and make it x2, y2, size 3, and size 4, and 5, 4. There we go. And again, instead of just writing 1, we just write another one, a rectangle, x, y, size 3, size 4, semicolon, and we have to change some initial constraints of it, because we don't want it, if you just run it now, it's going to be the same exact thing. So let's make the building size a little smaller. So let's make it from 300 to, this is a starting point for the building, so for the building rectangle. So let's make it 300 to 450. We'll run it. And there is a problem, and it's that it's drawing the same building things again. And I'm still looking for the problem. And the problem is here, because I didn't write, it should be x2, y2. And here we have smaller buildings, and you can see as we run it multiple times that you can see there's more smaller buildings happening, and that's good. That's kind of what we want. And we'll fiddle around with size 3 a little bit more. Maybe we make the buildings a little wider on the bottom, and we'll make this 125 and run it, and it looks a little better. It looks more like a city outline. And maybe the building size was a little too big, so maybe we'll make 100. We'll make it a little bit bigger, so we'll make it 100 to 200. Make it very wide. And maybe we'll make 15 buildings. But this is actually, it's making 2 rectangles every single time for this instance, so it's actually making 30 buildings, or 30 rectangles, we'll say. And maybe 30 was a little too much, because you can't see any lower part. And so we'll just make the random size of them a little smaller, like smaller width-wise for the second building and the lower rectangles being drawn. And there we have. It looks a lot more like city-like and more like an outline of a city. And so this is good. And maybe we change -50, because we want to be able to see that to the left corner, that it doesn't get missed. Because what's actually happening is there's kind of, it's missing, and it's looking better. It's looking better. That's the thing. So we're running it a couple more times. You can see looks okay. How about we make it the size of the width of the other buildings a little smaller, and we'll make them 50 to 75, and you run it and it looks okay. And let's change the Y. How about we make them a little bit smaller even, so now there's a little bit more variation in the height of buildings. And there we go. So now it's looking a lot more city-like, a lot more universal. So now that we have that done, what we could add is a road, and that's kind of like, also make the road on the same layer, because all it is a rectangle. So we're already drawing all these rectangles. We just have to draw after the other rectangles. But first we're going to change the fill to a different color so the road looks different than the rectangles we just drew. It doesn't mesh into the outline. So I just made it blue, so 0, 0, 255. That's blue. And we'll just make it, if you think of a rectangle at the very bottom, its x is going to be 0. We just want it on the 100 pixels at the bottom, so we're going to make it 500 pixels down. Width is the total width of the screen, and 100 pixels just because 600 minus 500 is 100. So there we go. There's our road, and you can see it actually. It's a city and a road. Looks pretty good. We'll save it, and we'll get to a different class. Okay, so now this this building, we kind of want it to look a little more realistic, and instead of just red, like bright red and bright green, bright red and bright blue, let's make it a little more darker and a little more like a night scene. So what we're going to do is just change some of the colors of the city that we already drew. And so instead of 255, 0, 0, we're going to make it 0, 0, 100. So now it's a little more, it's a darker blue. And it looks okay. It's a little too kind of out there of a blue, so we'll make it even darker. So now you can see it's a dark outline. Maybe it's too blue. So let's add 255 for some green and 255 for some red. And there we go. That's kind of our, that's the shade we'll have for the outline of the buildings. And now we go to the road. And the road, you can tell, is like blindingly blue. It's too blue. So what we could do is we kind of want it gray. And a simple way of making it gray is just, you don't need RGB, you just need one from 0 to 255. You don't need all. And 255 is very white. 0 is black. We'll make it 100, which is a darker gray. And it's a little too light still, so we'll make it an even lower number, so we'll make it 50. And there we go. There is a good road color. Looks a lot darker, so it works. And maybe we just change and make it 75 so it looks a little bit bluer, not as like blending into the background. And there we go. So that's a good city outline. There is our road. in the foreground. And what we want with a road is another line through it, like a yellow line that's through the middle of our road. And so we'll make it, it's going to start at 0, because that's the X position, because we wanted to cover the full length or full width of the canvas. And the Y is an interesting thing to kind of consider, like what is the Y we want? Now we want it halfway between the rectangle we just drew, the road rectangle. So what we could do is instead of we add a width kind of variable, we'll call it width of line, and we'll set it to 5. Now we have to, if we make a variable and it doesn't come out of thin air, we have to also declare it. So we'll make a float of width of line, and we'll change that. So now it looks at half of the Y is half of the rectangle minus width of line. So it's basically taking half of a rectangle and then adding a little bit above of it, and then when we draw the Y of it again, we'll add a little bit below it. So we want it to cover the full length, and then we add the Y, or I mean the size of it. We also want it to go down the same amount, so we'll just do width of line times 2. And when you run it, as you can see, you can't see it. And the reason you can't see it is because it's the same color as the rectangle we just drew, or the road. So we'll just change it, make it bright red, and once you run it, you can see there it is. Now we might want to thin it so it doesn't look as thick. And there we go. There's the width of line. It's actually 6 pixels wide because its thing is 3. So now we go and we want to look up a dark yellow for the line. So instead of just bright red, and I just looked up dark yellow road RGB, and we'll look at some examples. And this is okay. I wanted the more of a yellow, kind of a little more yellow, not just kind of like brownish. So this is the color we'll use. I kind of like it. It looks pretty yellow, but it's not too bright. And we'll just kind of look at it, make sure what it is. So it's 215. Let's go down to where we're putting the color in. So 215, 195, 42. So 195, 42. So you can see it's a lot more red and green than it is blue. And there we go. There's our yellow line. But it looks a little too bright. And a simple way I found is you just reduce the amount of pixels evenly. You reduce the number evenly. So we're just minusing 15 pixels for each RGB value. And 42 minus 15. I don't want to kind of 42 minus 15 because math is kind of eluding me right now, so I'm just putting it in parentheses because I'm not really sure what 42 minus 15 is. And there we go. It looks a little darker. And it still looks a little bright. So what we'll do is minus 30 instead. And 42 minus 30, I can do the math for that because that's pretty simple. It's just 12. And 180, we already minus 15, so what's minus 15 again? So that's going to be 65, 165. And 200 minus 15 is just 185. And once you run it, there we go. It looks a lot darker. I like the color of it, and it works. So that is how we changed and made it a little more realistic looking. And we'll save it and get into the next class. So for this new class, we'll be making the actual cars that we want to be moving on the road, because that's the last and most closest object that we see. So we're making a class called car for it, and then we'll add the constructor, which allows you to initialize the variables, and has the same name as the class name, so it's car. And now we want, what do we want for cars? So again, for cars, we want, we have to declare some variables. We want a position, so we want a float x, a float y. We also, because we're going to be making them using triangles, not triangles, rectangles, we're going to need a float size 1 and a size 2. And do we need, yeah, we'll also have an R and a float G and a float B, because what I'm going to do in this one is I'm also going to include a random color for every single car. So now we're going to initialize some of the variables. So not some, all, and we're going to initialize x equals random between, we'll just make it width for now. We'll do more making it actually what it should be in a little bit, but now we need a y equals a random value, and we'll just make it height. And we need to initialize 5 more variables. So we'll initialize size 1 equals, we'll do 40, and we'll do size 2 equals 20. And so it's going to have a 2-to-1 ratio, so it's actually going to be 2 times more wide than it is tall. And R, we'll just make it random 255, because there's 255 in every color, and we'll just copy that and paste that for all the different colors, and just change what value is being initialized, so RGB. And now we need to write a function to actually display those variables and use the variables that we just created. So we need the display function, we just wrote it, and we're going to no stroke, so that there's no outline. We also need a fill of RGB, and that includes, that's all the random values that we just created for every instance. And we're going to draw a rectangle at position XY at size 1, size 2. And if I can type, I also forgot I put a colon instead of a semicolon. You need semicolons after basically every line of code, except a few. And you run it, nothing's going to happen, of course, because we are not defining or declaring the class. We're also not declaring any instances of it and showing any functionality of it. So car, we're making an array. So car is equal to new car. So the array name is cars, and so we're copying the same for loop we did, and it's cars.length, cars, every instance, cars.instance of car. So we're basically making a new object at every instance of that. We're making a new object based on that class, and that's what the constructor helps do. And if you didn't put a constructor, it could still run, but it would have just a set variable of 0 basically every time. And that's not good, because that doesn't do anything. And we just write the functionality of it, and you can see cars are floating in midair. It's Harry Potter time. And that's not actually how we want the scene to be made. We want them to randomly be on the road, but randomly be on the road but also have kind of a set order to them. Because right now they're just anywhere in the canvas, and it's not good. And a simple way of doing this would just be flip a coin, and half of them go to one side, half of them the other. So that's what we're going to write. So flip coin equals random 0, comma 1. And because we just wrote a new variable, we have to declare the variable. Flip coin, we'll just make it a float, because floats are useful when doing random values. And now we need to draw an if statement for when we draw y's, because we don't care about x because it could be anywhere. And I put round, but then I thought you don't really need round. We can do an if statement without, so we'll get rid of it. Yeah, here we are getting rid of it, because you don't need to do it. You don't need round to do an if statement. And if flip coin is, we also have to put, I always put a parentheses after if, and then greater than or equal to 0 is 0.5, because that's midway between 0 and 1. And then we put that within the curly bracket, and height equals random. I'm going to change the x's and y's in a second, and then we just add an else statement, and this is when it's not greater than or equal to 0.5. So when it's like 0.3, and we'll just close that else statement. And now we kind of have to consider like what goes in each. So where do we want the height to start and end with? So, and based on the pixel size. So you can see it goes from 550 pixels. Actually, it goes from, so the road starts at 500. The road starts at 500. And so the road starts at, we'll do 547, because it's, we'll go back to city, 547, we'll do 500, because it's, the road starts at 500. And then it goes to 547, because that's, it's 550 minus the width of the line in the center. And again, we'll do 547. We'll do, actually that has to be times width of line 2, so because the line is 3, it is 550 plus 3, or 557 plus 6, which is 553. And the y also goes to 600. And once you run that, you can see it's drawing, it's good, but you can see the third car is kind of off the screen. We don't want that to occur. So what you have to do is do the farthest point, you have to minus the height of the car. So the height of the car is 20, so just write 20. And there we go. And it's running, and all the cars are within the lines of each other, so it's making good sense, and it's working pretty well. But what we want to do, and keep running it, it's working, it's all working good, is we want to make another function that actually will update or move the position of the car. So we're just going to call it move, void move, and within this function we're going to update the x position. We're not going to update the y position because you don't need to, because it's not going to be floating up in the air. We're just going to make it moving across the road. So if flip coin is greater than or equal to 0.5, And this has to do with what side of the road it is and how we update the coordinates of the x. So if flip coin is greater than or equal to 0.5, we need to x equals x plus speed. Now speed is a new variable, and it's just a new variable that we wrote for this. So again, you have to declare the variable above and initialize it. So we're going to do speed equals, we'll just make it 2. And if if x, so it's basically moving it across the screen to the right. But if it's greater than width plus the width of the rectangle or the car, so size, what designates width of the car? It's size 1, because that's what determines the width of the car. If it's greater than width plus size 1, then we want to set it back to x equals negative size 1. Because if you just do 0, it's going to be like, it's gonna just randomly appear out of nowhere. And we want to kind of drive off the screen fully and drive into the screen fully. And we copy the same loop and we just change some functions of it. So we want the speed to be going the opposite way, so we want it going from right to left. We also want it to be less than negative size, and we'll also change x to be width plus size 1. And we'll just take off those things and run it. As you can see, nothing happens, and that's because we haven't updated the functionality of the thing. So now we have to include the other function into the array for every instance. So cars.i.move. Now when you run it, it's working and the cars are being updated, but you can see they're going in the opposite way of the American non-English way of doing it. So what we need to do is we'll just go back to car and we'll just change the flip coin value. So we'll make it instead of greater than or equal to, make it less than. And that way the cars are running as they should. So there we are. And I'll just save this and okay, so now I want to talk about some improvements that could be made to this thing. So first off, you could make the moon move around too. You know, you could make its x change, maybe go a little slower, maybe its size could move. You can make the cars move faster. You can make them move slower. You can have them varying speeds. You could have some shooting stars going across. You know, you could have some lights coming out of the rectangles, have maybe different shapes for the cars, make them a little more interesting. There's a lot of different stuff you could do. You could change the city, have it form different ways. All this stuff you can do on your own. Take this code, use it as you like, find weird ways to do stuff with it. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment.